Okay, Professor. We have good morning. I mean,
Good morning.
yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
We have an insurmountable, impossible task to do, which is to nurture the soul of the American population that doesn't like Trump.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Right, and that's what we're going to attempt to do in the next hour, with a historical basis and around some facts rather than emotion. But you're pretty good at this kind of stuff. So I don't even know where to begin. So where I would like to begin, I mean, this is a big 4 days, right? I mean, this is the most consequential 4 days in American presidential history. Why? Because President Trump said it was. So I assume it is.
Let's
Um,
just put a pin in that and say no.
well, I know you may want to mention Truman or Lincoln or Washington. I don't know. There's been some
Yeah.
interesting times in American history, but hopefully you'll weave some of that in on what's happened in the last 4 days. And that's really important. Please do weave it in. Can I show? Oh, yeah. Does this show?
Wow.
These are my show notes.
Dang.
No, we
You're,
can't go through all the stuff he's done in the last 4 days. And
yeah.
so I guess I'd like to start at the beginning. We met last Friday, and we've had two conversations recently about the role of Article 1, Congress, that was 2 weeks ago, Article 2, Presidency, with an emphasis on the remaining days of the Biden administration and a foreshadowing of the Trump administration. That's been the last couple conversations we've had. And I don't want to talk about Trump for 4 years. I mean, it may be worthy of your time as a historian. I'm not sure it's worthy of any of our time as citizens. Do you agree or disagree? Do we have to talk about Trump every Friday for 4 years?
No.
Thank you. Okay. But I do think we're going to talk about him quite a bit today. And before I get to that, right? Gosh, this is way too long. I really do need to bring up pardons that President Biden did because we met on Friday. And between Friday and Monday morning,
Right. It was happening as we were taping the last show.
right?
So we didn't
I
know what
think
was going on when we were recording last week.
historically, I think that's really important. And yes, all my liberal friends are madder than hell at me for criticizing those pardons. I get it. Will you just give some historical perspective on the Biden pardons? We'll get to Trump in a minute.
Um, I guess the historical perspective on the Biden pardons, I mean, it would have to be some very recent history because I guess this cycle of evil that might lead to the eventual passing of a constitutional amendment banning pardons really starts with the Clinton administration. He's the one who, as he was leaving office, issued a bunch of pardons for his political supporters and especially ones who had given him money and were giving him money, and business part, and just it was an extraordinary thing for President Clinton to do. Nobody had ever
And
done
that didn't
it.
happen for the first 39-ish presidents.
No.
Okay.
I mean, I'm trying to think if there were any. I mean, there had been some. I mean, the most controversial pardon in American history, with the greatest political consequence, was probably the pardon of Nixon.
Nixon. Yeah,
But
sure.
I mean, you're talking about a fairly extraordinary circumstance. Right? There had never been anything like the Watergate scandal and the prosecution and the legal issues involved in Watergate. Never, um, I mean, except for maybe you'd say Andrew Johnson, who was impeached, but I mean, you'd have to go back to maybe I'm trying to think of every other extraordinary instance of the use of pardon. Abraham Lincoln after the Civil War.
Oh, but he pardoned a ton of people, didn't he? How many? Or or what was the big group of
I
pardons?
mean, basically pardoned, you know, soldiers who had
I mean, what is
attacked
that?
the United
Tens
States
of
government.
thousands. Yeah,
Right.
tens of thousands,
And
right?
he did it in mass too, which is again, I would say a good example of extraordinary times, truly extraordinary times, requiring the use of the pardon power.
So,
But it's sort
Professor,
of the low and petty use of pardon power really comes from Bill Clinton.
Okay, well, Professor, your dear friend and colleague, Professor Katzum,
Hmm.
got really mad at me. I think it's hard to tell if people are really mad or just typing mad at me when
Well, he
I
runs a little hot, so
yeah,
sometimes,
yeah. Well, but I
if you
mentioned
ask him a day later, he might calm down.
I mentioned a modest proposal that every 4 years we just should pardon 100 million Americans for their transgressions. And then that 4 years later we'll pardon another 100 million. And the reason it's not like 150 million is because there's some kids and old people in nursing. I don't think we need to pardon the kid. We should just pardon one side or the other of America every 4 years. And then he got mad at me. He said like ipsum locum colloquial or some Latin thing that said I was exaggerating.
Right.
But
We
really, but my point is these pardons are kind of ridiculous, aren't they? From Biden and Trump. And I mean, really, come on.
Well, it's uh, we've never had presidents like Clinton, Obama, Trump, and Biden before. We've never. I mean, essentially, the Obama administration followed the example of. I mean, Bush didn't do this, but the Obama administration kind of did the same thing, and then Trump did it, and then Biden really did it.
Put it
I
on
mean,
steroids.
yeah, I mean I can't believe the people. I don't even know who was giving him the list of people to pardon.
Oh, which
Uh,
one? Trump? Oh, okay.
Biden or Trump, because in both cases, well, I'll talk about Biden first. He said he was pardoning nonviolent drug offenders, but where
Yeah,
did
that
he
was
get this list of people? Because if you read the indictments of some of the people he pardoned, I mean, the case that's maybe the most famous is this drug lord in Fayetteville, North Carolina, or whatever, who had used a taser against a female private parts and poured boiling water on drug associates, you know, and Biden pardoned him as a nonviolent drug offender. Who gave him this list? And nobody has arisen to defend it. And then the same thing happened when President Trump was confronted and said, "Hey, you pardoned people who who actually attacked police officers," and he
at
looked
least
confused,
160 of
like
them.
like he didn't know.
Yeah.
um, and he had no answer, and the question the reporter asked, which is perfectly fair, you said you were going to do this 2 days ago. JD Vance said you were going to do this 2 days ago, and then you didn't do that. You did something else. And he's like, what?
Yeah.
Like, who did and he's like,
Therefore, my crazy statement that we should just, I actually believe in forgiveness and redemption. And I think that's great. We should just pardon 100 million Americans every 4 years and we just have a reset.
I think I've heard a couple of good reform ideas that and I kind of want to combine both of them into a new constitutional amendment.
Okay.
Um,
Well, you have 20 seconds and that's it because we got to
yeah,
go to
yeah,
the
no.
rest.
The what I heard was that nobody can be pardoned between the election and the new swearing in, and in addition, all pardons have to go through the advice and consent process. So
Of
they
the
have to be
Senate.
approved by the Senate by 2/3 vote.
I like the first part. Not sure I like the second part.
Well, how about this? There's another proposal that I kind of like, which was when the pardon power was first issued, there were only like 3 or 4 federal crimes.
Right.
You say the president has an unlimited power to pardon these original 4 federal crimes that
Right.
existed at the time of the Constitution, right? And say for everything else, it has to go through the advice and consent process.
Yeah, there might be, because what's going to happen is whatever happens in the next 4 years of all the investigations, and maybe Liz Cheney, well, I guess she's okay, but there's going to be other people that worked for Liz Cheney that they're going to be investigated, and then we're going to have to pardon all those people when a Democratic president takes over again in 4 years or 8 years or whenever. It's going to be an ongoing back and forth.
But
Really,
here's the other thing that I would support. I mean, my third choice, So I've just given you kind of my first. I'd be fine with any combination of those three reforms, but my third choice would be just get rid of it altogether. This is a vestige of the power of monarchy,
Let's go
and
back to the king. Yeah.
yeah, and when the founders were dividing up the powers that kings had traditionally had, they felt the need to put this somewhere.
So,
As,
Professor, you are
and by the way,
talking.
this is what both Biden and Trump did is specifically what Alexander Hamilton said would be an impeachable offense.
Yeah, yeah, right. I actually remember you saying that.
They said that's what impeachment is for. If a president ever used the pardon power, you know, Hamilton was like, "This is a perfect." You know, when people ask like, "What would be something that would require impeachment?" and they've said this.
Great. You just made news. A U.S. history professor calls for the impeachment of President Trump on day 4. Great. Thanks, Professor. Okay, so you're talking to one of the very few people in society. Out of the 350 million of us, how many do you know that actually studied constitutional history of medieval England?
I wouldn't even know if I claimed that.
I did at the
Okay.
University of Northern Colorado. I got an A in that class. So I disagree. I think the pardon, this is going to crack you up. Wait till you rip into me. You're welcome to rip into me. I'm making a point, kind of like I did with Professor Katzen. We need to keep the pardon. You know why? It's a form of equity. When the law says thou shalt or thou shalt not, and everything was followed by the rules, there still should be some escape valve in society where we go, yeah, he broke the law or they broke the law. But for equity reasons, which we all hate apparently now, but for equity reasons, the pardon is a form of equity, fellow conservatives. Now, you can rip back into me if you wish.
Well, I just feel like you're not wrong, but if that's true and it's there to address an injustice, then have it be the same threshold as like approving an appointment, 2/3 in the Senate.
Yeah, I know, but that's too hard to get Congress. If you've seen Congress, you can't get Congress to agree to anything. But okay, we got to go on.
I don't know.
Ready?
Unanimously approved of Marco Rubio as
Yeah. And
Secretary
boy,
of
that's
State.
an interesting
They
point.
passed the Lincoln Riley Act. I mean,
Yeah.
true act of injustice would be something that 2/3 of senators would probably be fine with.
Well, and we could also show a lot of examples where that's not true too. But the point made. Okay, Professor, we haven't even talked. I tried to make a transition to all of his DEI stuff, and it is executive order after executive order after executive order. There's a ton. I can read them to you if you want. You need them?
If you want to talk about anything specific.
Well, yeah. I mean, you just stop me when you want to, but realize we have like 3 minutes on this total. Declare that there's 2 sexes, male and female, like it or not.
That's probably fine as far as it goes.
Exactly. Banning all DEI across federal government agencies. All.
Well, I guess sometimes, and we need to make this distinction, I guess, like, and Bart could probably help with this too, but like, I need to know if you're asking me if it's illegal or if it's a good policy idea.
Oh, it's not illegal. You can do that.
I know, but there are going to be some things on this list that are actually illegal.
And we haven't gotten there yet. Yeah. But he can do that. Also, good policy to get rid of all diversity, equity, and inclusion across all of federal government. Good idea.
I mean, as long as it's as long as it is defined. I mean, and this is the hard part when we start talking about DEI stuff. As long as we're defining it as equality, that is what needs to be protected. But when DEI instruction and training is defined as the opposite of equality, then you need to get rid of it.
Yeah. So cool. We got to keep moving. Rescinded the Biden administration policy on trans in the military. Didn't ban trans like he did in the first one, but he rescinded Biden's policy. Trans should be able to serve in the Army or not.
Sure.
Well,
but again, it's not always about, I mean, in almost all these policies, that's why you have to look at what's actually being ordered, because in some cases it's, denial of medication and things like that. You know,
Right, that's different. But I think
yeah, yeah.
I think the
So
first
I
term he
just,
banned trans, right?
pardon?
First term he banned trans. He's going to do that again. He just hasn't done it yet.
I don't remember.
Yeah, well, we'll keep going. Not only the federal government, but federal agencies like the FAA's telling them to all the different agencies, independent or not.
If
Fine.
banning trans?
No, sorry. DEI.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay. Revoked the Johnson executive order from 1965. Reagan didn't do that. Bush didn't do that. Why do you have to go all the way back to 1965 and revoke the executive order? Year before I was born. What was wrong with
Well,
it?
I mean, I think the argument is that that in some ways it's contrary to where the law has been moving, and the other thing I guess you would argue is it's been 35 plus 25 years. It's been 60 years. Maybe it's time to put the law back on the legal footing of equality.
Now you have waxed poetic probably 25 times out of our 108 conversations or whatever it's been about how unequitable blacks were treated in America, even after the Civil War, all the way up to I think like 1970, early 70s. You've said it was pretty brutal. Not everywhere in America, but in many places in America, they weren't treated fairly.
Mhm.
You've talked about that a lot, right? So from
So a
19,
lot of people aren't treated fairly. Yeah, yeah.
right?
It's something that will always exist in a free society.
True, but but that's a different point. You've gone, they weren't treated fairly, and because they were black, they were even treated more unfairly.
Right, and it was systemic and different than any other
Right.
group in American
Yeah.
history. Right.
But you think we've made it past all that. So now is the time for him to be really bold on all this stuff.
Well, again, I want to make sure I say we're never past it, but there are still real racists in American society. But the number of racists is, but uh, the number of people who are racists who could do bad things in society, it's still large enough that they need to be monitored and punished for their crimes and have ways of reporting it. But in terms of the forms of discrimination and prejudice, um, the prejudice specifically against Black people is now sort of lower middle of the pack in terms of forms of discrimination and prejudice that exist in America. So,
The middle of the
depending
pack
on
of what comparison? Sorry.
oh, I guess, you look at things like who would disapprove of their child getting married to a Black person and compare that to, say, Mormons or Jews or evangelical Christians.
Okay,
And
so
you'd
compared to other minority groups in America,
Right.
you mean?
When you begin comparing unpopular minorities to one another and, social attitudes towards, um, the typical ways you would try to measure public racism.
Okay.
uh,
Let me switch gears, and the only reason for it is because we've gone through about 1/8 of my page,
okay.
and we're already at 10:11. Gosh, I told you this was going to be impossible. The one thing that I thought it was really interesting that he is demanding, or you don't demand this, well, you can demand too, but he's ordering an official executive order for every government agency to identify top 9 businesses over a certain amount of money or a certain amount of employees or who have notoriety, nonprofits, organizational, higher education institutes for civil action to make sure that they are not discriminating by having DEI policies. So I
Well,
bet you
here's
like
what I
part
can
of
tell you
that.
what my hope is.
Yeah, I bet you like part of it, and
I
you're
know
concerned about
exactly
part of it.
who the largest entity is who is
The
engaged.
University of California.
No, it's the California Community College System
Yeah.
is by
Okay. Well,
far
yeah.
the largest purveyor of discrimination in the United States. Yeah.
Great.
Uh,
You've already turned in your big employer into the Trump administration.
I should. I mean,
Well, you don't have to. I'm sure it's on somebody's list.
well, there are
Um,
already lawsuits pending, so one assumes
do we really want the federal government to be identifying private sector businesses and nonprofits to ensure that they're doing whatever policy the federal government does? Say somebody really does want equity in their.
Let me put this a different way. Do you want the 14th Amendment enforced? Because what we decided is that the federal government does have the power to enforce civil rights laws within the states.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'd like to talk. We might talk more on this subject, obviously.
Well, we're going to have to, because one of the other things he did was to break the 14th Amendment.
Well, go ahead. Go ahead.
Birthright citizenship, right?
What?
Birthright citizenship.
Oh, we missed a big one, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Seriously, Professor, what's going on with that? Did you read the Seattle judge's
Really
opinion?
unconstitutional, and it will get laughed out of court.
But it was hilarious. Did you read his opinion?
No,
He's
but
been
I thought,
a
which one?
Reagan appointee, and he said, I've served on the bench for 40 years, and I have never once seen an act that is so blatantly unconstitutional. And then he followed it up to the lawyers. He goes, did you check this by some constitutional stuff? He goes, yeah. And he
Yeah.
goes, really? The legal team on the Trump administration checked the Constitution? I don't believe it.
Now, this is one of those things that's completely made up by John Eastman, I think, and maybe some others, maybe some of his friends. But um, let's, I guess we could charitably call it an idiosyncratic view of the
Okay.
Constitution. Yeah, that
So
it just
we'll
doesn't
talk
mean
more
it
about it
applies.
because this is a big deal because it affects real people's lives. And I know a bunch of my friends don't want anchor babies. They're madder than hell. They've been madder than hell for 40 years. They
Well,
think it's
here's my
wrong.
prediction. It will affect 0 human beings in America, because this is one that's going to go down in flames. I mean, it
Okay.
already is,
Just,
right?
so it will be the temporary stay will become a injunction, and then it will become a permanent injunction, and then it will be ruled
And
unconstitutional by the
in
U.S.
fact,
Supreme Court.
oh, yeah, so much so that it's that the my favorite legal podcast, Advisory Opinions, is saying we're going to see a distorting effect because every single judge knows that this is going to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
So it's actually going to alter the way that judges actually write their briefs, because everybody knows that that one's on a rocket ship straight to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, because it affects real people's lives, right? And so that's the reason for the immediate stay. And you're saying it's patently unconstitutional. So let's not even mess around with it.
When it's struck down 9-0, the only thing that will be interesting or will be, if there are concurring opinions, if everybody wants to write a different concurring opinion about
Well,
how.
but there will be concurring opinions because the two current Supreme Court decisions weren't unanimous. There'll be some concurring opinions. I'm not positive it's going to be 9-0.
Yeah, I bet it will be 9-0 on.
I'm not positive about that. Interesting.
Okay.
Okay, we gotta keep moving.
Yeah, okay.
We got to go way more rapid on this
Okay,
because
sorry.
we've still only done 1/8. I'm going to skip the not
We did
must.
200. We can't cover 200 executive orders. I mean,
Yeah, we can. This is why you have a history degree. You're supposed to be able to tell us stuff.
Right.
I'm going to skip the Musk Nazi and his jokes on X. I'm just going to skip it unless you really have to say it. Is that anything important? Thank you.
No, but I do have one thing actually, since this will largely be portrayed as a anti-Trump by Trump supporters. Let's take a moment and praise one thing that he did that is actually legal and constitutional, which is that what he did was he took that existing Obama agency for Doge and just sort of renamed it and repurposed it. So all of those legal and constitutional issues that had been previously brought up because of the way he was describing it, all those just go away, and now it's legal.
I'm not sure I followed you. How do we switch off Musk into that?
Oh, well, Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy were the two that were, allegedly.
But it would have been unconstitutional if they didn't take an existing.
Yeah, well, it would have been a like a task force that had to follow very specific laws and wouldn't be able to do very much.
So it would have been like an extra legal thing that.
and they would have had to have every meeting public,
Yeah.
every report would be public, every conversation would be public, and it wouldn't have any legal authority to do
Okay.
anything, and so
That's helpful.
so Vivek Ramaswamy, he's gone. He can't do any. So all the stuff that you thought Doge was going to do, like all the big headline, no, it can't do any of that stuff anymore. But a lot of the stuff that Elon Musk was talking about, this agency can actually do, which is where can computers make government more efficient. There was already an executive agency from the Obama administration that had that as its charter, and so by simply sort of renaming it, but it's going to wildly disappoint the people who thought it was going to somehow balance the budget. It won't. It can't do that.
Give me one more example of what Vivek
So,
said.
I mean, what they will be able to do is like reform the computer system used by Social Security Administration, you know. But what it can't do is save $1 trillion.
Really?
Yeah. No. So, I mean, if you think that it's going to somehow find $1 trillion of waste, fraud, and abuse, you're going to be disappointed. But who knows if Elon Musk actually works there and actually hires smart people. I mean, who knows? But a lot of things, a lot of dominoes would have to fall here. If he actually does this, it could actually be an agency to improve government efficiency, because that's what it was supposed to do. You have to go back to, remember when Obamacare failed because the website crashed?
Mm-hmm.
You remember? So this is an agency that was supposed to fix stuff like that.
Right.
And so essentially, yeah. Okay. So anyway, sorry.
I'm going to think more on that. Thank you. Cabinet appointments. We don't really have to talk about this much historically because really the system's working, right? I mean, it's going through the advice and consent of the Senate, and we can either love him or hate him. I mean, for a little bit, there was a concern that he was just going to appoint everybody in a recess appointment, and that's not happening. So good, right? System's working.
Yeah, I mean, we're down to sort of nut cutting time on the two controversial appointments.
What cutting?
Isn't that an old expression? I mean,
no. Maybe it's a locker room.
I never thought about if that's a bad word or not. That's just an old expression. We're down to nut cutting time. Like, I don't. Okay. And so we'd say, like, we don't know what's going to happen to Tulsi Gabbard or to Robert Kennedy Jr. And so those are the two that are sort of.
But the system's working, right? Historically, there's.
Yep. Seems like cool. And I was really pleased to see that Marco Rubio was unanimously confirmed. I think that was a good signal from the United States Senate.
I think that's helpful as well. I think it's good for our society to not argue about every tit for tat. Yes. Right. Okay. I don't know how I'm going to do this. We're going to skip full-time work in office. Everybody's got to go back to the office. We're going to, right? I mean, fine.
Yeah, you can do that.
How about the Schedule F? A bunch of folks before the election were really concerned that he's going to classify all, like, tens of thousands of federal government employees, make them swear a loyalty oath to Trump. I don't know. I read it. I don't think it's a loyalty oath to Trump. It says you have to follow the administration priorities. And it specifically says you don't have to politically or personally support the current president. So at least in writing, maybe in the administration, in the hallways, there's some pretty uncomfortable. I don't know. Are you worried about it?
Might get challenged in court, but I think that it will survive.
Well, and also, won't we find out the abuses? Whoever does get fired, won't they just like record the recording and then it will be on the news and we'll go, oh my, won't we discover the horribleness?
Yeah, I assume. Yeah.
So let's skip that for now. We've already talked about the 1,500 or 1,600 pardons, and we both just think that was crazy.
Absolutely.
Historically, an important craziness, and we got to stop it somehow. You're even urging some citizen constitutional amendments. Fascinating. Okay. How about getting out of WHO? I'm sorry, not even be WHO.
World Health Organization.
Yeah, World. Yeah. How was that? Is that okay? We did it last time.
I'm a long-term supporter of international organizations and international law, dating back to, my obsession with late 19th century secretaries of state.
League of Nations stuff?
Well, not really League of Nations stuff because
I'm
I,
on it.
I've always been, I should say, I'm I'm a supporter of these things the way we talked about them in the late 19th century, which is always preserving American sovereignty and then engaging in mutually beneficial contracts with people around the world. Um, but I would say that the behavior of the World Health Organization and the UN, it's been bad for a while, but the the specific actions of like the UN, okay, WHO during COVID, and then the UN because during the uh, Israeli Gaza war, um, have done more to undermine international institutions than um, than I ever suspected. And I think that there are some babies that are going to get thrown out with this bathwater because these organizations do an awful lot of good, but uh, I don't fault people for wanting a reappraisal of both. And
Okay,
in many cases, a very serious reappraisal of both.
cool. I've got like 6 more like that.
Yeah.
Rescind the 2020 Biden order on prescription drugs. Fine or no? Wait, why are we
I
doing
haven't,
all
I,
this?
yeah, I haven't looked at it, so I can't speak on that.
But it's executive order. Why is it not a statute? Anyway, that's my own.
Well, if it's rescinding something Biden did, why
I know.
didn't Biden pass the original law? You know, and for a lot of this stuff, because I think that it was all inappropriate to be done by executive order, let me just issue a blanket, like if it's just Trump undoing a Biden executive order, like I'm fine with it. If it's a good idea, get it through Congress.
But because the next Democrat's going to do the exact same thing, they're just going to go revert, kill all the Trump stuff, right?
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah. So I mean, I'm against all of it.
is it unreasonable? Is it unreasonable for a citizen, that's me in this instance, to just say, let's go to congressional regular order? There are committees that supposedly have some expertise in different areas of society that they can pull in experts, they debate it, they can have the lobbyists do their thing, we can hear it, we can watch it on C-SPAN, we can think about it, and then it goes to another committee, appropriations or something, and rules, and then
I
it goes,
just want,
oh, is it
you know what I want? I don't want I want an apology from every second term Obama supporter because I was, banging my spoon on the table saying this is a terrible idea. And when they kept saying, "Oh, but I support the policy." It's like, I don't care that you support the policy. Do you understand that you're opening this up and to the next president coming along and doing exactly the opposite thing and they would all say, "Oh, you're crazy," but it's such a good idea. I don't care how Obama is doing it. And I want to go back to every one of those people. I want them all to apologize to me because
well,
this is
and the reason for it
exactly
though
what I
is
predicted. Like,
the reason for it is because citizens have less input into their government. They have less ability to influence legislation. If it's all done in secret, and it just goes right to the floor, and we don't even know what it is, or we have 24 hours or something to read it, how does any citizen have any ability to do anything on that?
well, then maybe, I mean, call me crazy here. Maybe the states and the counties should be doing more, and the federal
Excellent.
government should just be giving them money and
Love
saying,
that too. I
our
don't even know
new
why.
policy is that we're just going to give money to counties, and counties are going to do this. And
Yeah.
the only part of this that's going to be a federal statute is solve this problem. Here's a giant pile of money.
Yeah.
Like,
And I'd rather not even do the giant pile of money either. I'd rather have locals have to increase their own taxes and the federal government to decrease taxes, and that way even gives more. But
but let's remember though that as good I want as good Republican conservatives,
well, that's
old
you, not
Whiggish
the
Republican
Republic.
conservatives, that the proper role of government is to do for a community of citizens what they cannot do or do so well for themselves in their separate but individual capacities. And there
Agreed.
are things where the federal government is collecting tax money, and it would be and states and counties can't do that. And the federal government can borrow money too, which
Well, that's all good, but why? Okay, I hate to get into this micro, but it's illustrative. The federal gas tax, we pay for it each pump. There's a state gas tax. Why can't we just eliminate the federal gas tax? I don't want to eliminate it because there are some interstate highway stuff, but why can't you drastically reduce it and just say states increase it that amount? It's not a tax increase. And instead of the roads, there's lots of federal highways that really aren't federal highways. They're actually just interchanges in the local. And why don't we drastically not, because we take
perfect example, precisely because we don't want to, we can decide as a group of Americans that we don't want to disincentivize the use of electric vehicles. So we need to have some sort of alternative national tax that is then redistributed back to the states for the maintenance of interstate highway systems.
I think I got your point.
I just mean that, like, as a society, there are certain things that only counties can do, and there are things that only states can do, and that only the federal government can do. And so if it's something that only the federal government can do, we have to have the federal government do it, even if the solution to that problem is local or state.
Okay, 30 seconds on this one. Oh gosh, it's so unfair to do that. Revoking the security clearances of people that don't like President Trump, including some pretty big ones like Pompeo. Really?
Fine.
No, it's not. What happens there? It's a really dangerous world, Professor. I know there's threats against you, and there's probably
you can
threats.
always get it back if we need you back in government service. There's no point in having a bunch of people who aren't in the government still having security clearance.
I misspoke. I agree. I misspoke. Security protection. I'm talking about
that. Right. Okay. Two different orders.
Yeah.
One, I'm against the other. Right.
Okay. If Mike Pompeo gets
revoking the protection and Secret Service protection for those people is a bad idea.
It's a really bad idea, Professor.
Removing their security clearance is a good idea.
Yeah. But I just want to emphasize that I think it's possible that this is could be a defining element of the Trump administration. If we have a couple major people get assassinated because he took away their clearances, and it ends up being a foreign power doing it, that's not a crime just against the person gets assassinated. It's a harm against the American citizens. It's a harm against our power and stature in the world. It is really a dumb idea.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, it's hard to overstate how bad it is.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. I'm glad. I thought we were different on it. And we do different things, but okay, now two big ones, and I don't know how we're going to do this in 5 minutes or less, maybe 2.5 minutes apiece. Ready? It'd be horrible if Pompeo was kidnapped. Oh my gosh, it would be devastating, and not just for him and his family. It would be a viewer for listeners in the future typed it in.
Or how about Pompeo's grandchildren?
Oh,
I mean,
it is. It's the definition of terrorism.
Start World War III, right?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't start World War III, it will prevent good people from going into public office.
No doubt. Yeah, it's just bad in so many ways. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
glad we're on the same.
Like I said, it's hard to overstate how bad it is. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Two major things, and then I'm gonna see what I missed, and then we're gonna open it up for discussion. So 2.5 minutes on both of these, and then we Q&A. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Withdrawing and all the energy stuff. It's fine he got rid of the electrical car mandate up to 50%. It's fine that he's restarting LNG exports. It's fine that he withdrew from the Paris Accord. It's fine that he's banning wind and whatever. And making energy policy a national emergency. I think those are the big Paris Climate Accord. Yeah, all that stuff are in the environment. If you knew that before, or people knew that before they elected him, he's a drill baby drill guy. He said it, and we want to get rid of all that other stuff. Talk to us a little historically. Is this a major sea change, or is this just a grudge? I personally know the new Secretary of Interior, and I know the energy guy. I was in his home just 2 months ago. So cool.
Well, I would just say the same thing I said to my Obama friends in his second term. Now let me talk to my Trump friends.
Okay.
If you agree that Trump can do this via executive order, be prepared for the Democratic president to come in and say Green New Deal without a single congressional vote. Like, I disagreed with the idea that Biden could do this by executive fiat, and I disagreed, and I would be fine with Trump undoing what Biden did by executive fiat. But to then take the further step is we're not only going to undo it, but we're going to impose our own energy policy, which is different. And I hate the comparisons that people sometimes make with the Bush administration. If you want to know who did this right, George W. Bush, right? And it was heavily criticized. It was the most heavily criticized thing. It was a huge news story before 9/11. I don't, you have to sort of remember what people
Can't
were,
quite remember yet. Go
yeah,
ahead.
we're like, just, all up in arms about with the Bush administration pre 9/11. But he did it right, which is you set up a commission full of people who are actual experts to say, here's what the 20-year energy outlook looks like for the United States, and how we're going to solve this problem is by a combination of executive action and legislation, and it's going to set the United States up for the future, the next 20, 30, 40 years. That's the way to do it. I am very nostalgic for the energy policy, the balanced energy policy of what the Bush administration proposed. If I had my magic wand and I was rewriting that Bush report, I would say what I would want is, modernizing our electrical grid with nuclear power that is going to supplement a modern electrical grid, and why not reform our ports while we're at it? Those are the two sort of, like, I always consider those things like the low hanging fruit of things that the federal government should do, is electrical grid, port system, and I would also say make it more possible for people on the West Coast to have access to desalinization, and the building of desalinization
Big
plants.
issues that it would be
Yeah.
very hard for an individual to do.
Don't need it. Yes, it's sort of once you get much east of Denver, but for certainly everybody living on the west of the Rockies, the ability to have water and power where you need both of those things to go, it's going to require a thoughtful federal action that it's just not going to have. But
So you're on energy policy changes of the Trump administration. You stick with your conservative roots, and you wish it to be congressional action rather than executive fiat.
well,
Even if
it's going to be a combination of all these things, because we do have a Department of Energy that is under the president, so there are going to have to be. It doesn't have to necessarily be executive orders, but people in charge of the energy department doing specific things to make these other policies possible, along
and
with.
and by the way, I know Chris Wright. He formerly lived just 3 blocks north of me, and he is well, in a much wealthier home. He's a
Well, Mr. Fancy Pants.
he's a really smart guy. He's actually a really good pick. Okay, one big issue, 2 minutes to do it. Ready?
Yep.
We have declared a national emergency at the border, and we're sending federal troops. Historic precedent. Good, bad, neutral. You're the historian.
Well, there are historical precedents. I mean, we invaded Mexico, went after Pancho Villa, but good. I don't know. The thing is, we always talk about this crisis at the border, but to be honest, I'm not even sure what the scope and the scale of the crisis is. And I can't tell if the border state governors are being honest or engaging in political grandstanding, or if they're desperate. So I'm not willing to say it's unnecessary, because I just don't know. I don't know who to trust on this.
Well, so Professor, we've got a subject matter expert with us, Debbie Holen, who's a former Aurora City Council person. And of course, you know, Trump came out and the whole thing is going to be called Project Aurora, where she was a former elected official. So let's interrupt real quick and give her the honor before we run out of time. And Debbie, you can talk about immigration. You can talk about what we talked about last week. I cut you off last week and I feel guilty about it. And so really, I'm giving you the honor of asking Professor Tootle or make a statement, anything you want to, especially if it's nonviolent critique.
So thank you, John. The last time we met, I left feeling very, I wasn't angry, but I was really concerned that the discussion felt like, yay, Trump, yes, everything. His, that before John had made a couple comments about there will be checks and balances. We need more Americans to step forward and make those checks and to help ensure that there are checks and balances. But after last discussion, I felt like, oh, there we go. It's all off, that people really aren't concerned that he does have carte blanche to just go do everything he wants to do. I have to rephrase what I have to do now is, after this discussion and hearing some of the things that you, Stefan, have said, gives me more hope that we will be able to survive the 4 years and prosper. I know it's going to be a struggle for a lot of us because the cost of living is obviously going to go up, out of the and para and pensions and Social Security and all of that. Those limits are affecting a lot of people in the middle class. So it's going to be a struggle for us, but I think that we'll be able to come out of it a little bit. So I'm not sure where my question is right now.
But you're doing a pretty good, eloquent job of articulating anxiety or unease, particularly when it's from a friend, me, talking to a conservative professor. And that was your concern last week. And now, and we've critiqued him enough, I guess, today to salve a little bit of that. Have you thought of his question, or would you just like Professor Tootle to respond?
I really don't have a specific question right now.
Well, Professor Tootle, she is a very smart, eloquent, thoughtful person. I really like Debbie, but she's not alone. Almost every day I get a private message from a friend going, and you're still comfortable with Trump, or, and that's to me. They're going, we're not going to have a next election. I had that argument yesterday with somebody. We're not going to have an election in 2026. What? Yes, we are. But they're mad. I mean, they're authentic. They're not performative. They are truly concerned. And admittedly, almost all of them are on the more liberal side. Conservatives are still pretty happy. Can you just give some sense of where we are after the first 4 days and how we as citizens should engage for the next 4 years?
Yes.
Well, I would just say that something I learned after the last Trump administration, now that we've had some time to think about it, is, and maybe this is why it sounded like we weren't critical enough last time, is because of these sort of 2 lessons that I learned from the first Trump administration. And rule number 1 is never underestimate the incompetence and capriciousness of the Trump administration. And rule number 2 is never try to predict the results of this incompetence and capriciousness. Because if you had told me a week ago that he was going to pardon a bunch of people he didn't know he was pardoning, or maybe he meant to, I don't know. I would have never been able to predict that. And if you would have told me that no, Doge is actually going to become a thing that actually might do some good, I would have never been able to predict that. And you can't ascribe those things to competence and purposefulness. It's just this is what it's like. So we try to follow the old Midwestern expression, don't borrow trouble. Like, because I don't know how this stuff is going to come out, I have to wait until he does something, because I have no idea. I know what he says, but
Right.
that's in some ways the least reliable. What he says might not have any relationship to what happens.
So he
Okay.
says we're going to ban birthright citizenship, and
Yeah.
then 2 days later, it's on injunction, and you're saying it's going to be a 9-0 vote. So why get all bent out of shape about what he says about it until he actually orders it, until a judge says something?
We should be bent out of shape of it, because for the same reason we were bent out of shape, because what Obama did and what Biden did, which is doing stuff that's unconstitutional just to please your political supporters, knowing that the Supreme Court is going to have to step in and be the bad guy. And then you're going to tell your political supporters that the Supreme Court is corrupt and evil and they need to be stopped. Right? And it undermines the long-term legitimacy of the Supreme Court and our legal institutions. And so we should be up in arms about it when Trump does it, just like we should have been up in arms about it when Obama and Biden did it.
And Debbie, you've never seen anyone on council or me on the commission be performative and try to do things that they know they can't do, but they just say it to get votes.
To please, I get that as a former politician, yeah, sometimes you do. You just throw out that rhetoric just to make sure it helps you get reelected. I get all of that.
Oh, sorry. I just had a little anecdote from my earlier political days. I used to do all these talks with these little groups, and one of them was pretty far out there, right? And they kept asking me about these things that I assume had something to do with some conspiracy theory they believed in. But I remember during the Q&A, they asked me how I felt about the New World Order, and I just said, I'm against it. And they all applauded. And I have no idea what they thought that meant, but apparently that was the right answer.
I think we can run you for office. Yeah,
What's that?
We can run you for office.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I'm against the New World Order. I don't know what it is, but
right. Yeah,
it sounds scary, doesn't it?
It sounds like I should be against that, you know?
Yes, yes. And my other thing is that I stumbled upon this, the Bill of Obligations by Richard Haas, and it's all about being what a good citizen should be. And I have been trying to push this. I'm the executive director of the Colorado School and Public Employees Retirement Association. So I found a school that we are piloting it with, a 5th grade class, but it is all about being a good citizen and the things that citizens should be doing. And it's like we may not have been where we are now if more people understood the Constitution and were good citizens. So I just want to push that again, and maybe you, John, you can lead a book study or something on it, because it's very short. There's a workbook that goes with it, and it's very thoughtful, and I just want to push that again.
You've been pushing me, and I haven't done it yet, but Professor Tootle's pushing me on a couple things, and I haven't done it yet. Yeah, you're pushing.
I know you pushed me to, I should do more stuff on Substack, and I got as far as logging into it today and looking at it. But I want to say when I was living in Colorado, I was really impressed with, I'm trying to remember the name of the organization, but there was a guy named Bill Verdon up at University of Northern Colorado, and he just did an amazing job organizing Colorado history events. And I was very impressed with at least how I participated in 1 or 2 of these events when I was there. And to think about it, like I was only there for 2 years. And so I was, wow, these people are really taking Colorado history seriously. And I thought at the time, I have no idea if any of this has been undone in the last 20 years, but Colorado actually used to have a pretty good system for maintaining history standards, and in particular, history standards in elementary schools and high schools and in teacher training. And at the time I thought, wow, this could be a model for what other states do. And in case you're wondering, California does the opposite in all regards. But at least when I was living there were good people doing good things and seemed to be on the right track.
Excellent. Debbie, thank you. I hope you join us again. Ray, you're a complete newcomer to me. You're a stranger, in other words. I always try to welcome new strangers and give them a shot at asking a question. You don't have to, but if you want to take yourself off video, or I think you can speak. Ray, do you have any questions?
I have dozens, but I'll try to limit it to one. Stephen, I don't know if you remember, I met you out in Cody, Wyoming at TAH event back in
wow, yeah, of course.
in September. So we got to tour the Heart Mountain Japanese internment camp. I work part-time for an organization. I'm a retired American history, American government teacher, and I work part-time for an organization called Teaching American History. And Stephen teaches sometimes in our programs, in a graduate program, and then these what we call multi-day seminars. But I would have a question about the birthright citizenship, but probably the more general question. We seem to be in this executive order cycle. Administrations flipping and everything gets undone. Is there, but we also seem to be in a cycle of gridlock in Congress. Is there a third way? Is there some kind of way that Congress could do something kind of like on the War Powers Act model, say, you're going to take these executive orders and Congress has 90 days to reverse them or something of that nature? Would that be an option that would be not ideal, but viable?
Professor, try to answer both then, both birthright again and that first one.
Well, birthright is why didn't he could make the same performative process by sending a proposal for a constitutional amendment to Congress as he did with the executive order, and he would get bipartisan support. I'm a liberal Democrat. I think that issue ought to be on the table for discussion. I think there's a lot of complexity to it, but it ought to be on the table. So I think he could have had more success if he had said, I'm going to propose this as an amendment to Congress day one. Anyway, thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, no, and in a lot of ways, it's first of all, I guess we should really say that, like, on my list of heroes in this world, Ray Tyler is one of those people who has just decided to dedicate his life to civic education. Yeah. So in terms of what
you guys do each other.
Thank you.
So when this is his first time logging into this show, but you heard Stephen Knott earlier on this show say the same thing, that he's just decided that what he needs to do is dedicate his life to civic education. Well, what Ray Tyler has decided to do is dedicate his life to civic education. So when we say things like, this is what we hope people should do, we're like, this is what this guy is literally doing, right? And
Love
so,
that.
So first, just thank you a million times. Thank you. And if you go a week without thinking that I'm not thanking you, just put that thanks in your head, because I'm thanking you every single week for what you're doing 364 days in a year, right? So, but I think you're right, but it reminds me so much of our discussions about immigration and taxation, these kind of big issues, and birthright citizenship is like this. It would be great if we actually did have a public debate about, here's a big question. Like, we understand that the birthright citizenship law came about because of a very specific set of circumstances coming out of the Civil War. Is that still necessary? And I'm at least open to hearing some honest debate about what would be our ideal immigration policy in terms of birthright citizenship. But it's going to have to involve a constitutional amendment, but that constitutional amendment would also have to involve federal legislation. And it really needs to be a part of a larger conversation about what should the role of immigration be in American life. And that's the kind of thing that if we had good presidents who were engaged in their role as head of state, could lead Americans through a national conversation, an honest national conversation about what the role of immigration, what role is immigration supposed to play in American life. And then building that kind of consensus would result in probably a need for legislation and probably constitutional amendment. But I'm saying, I don't know.
So, Professor,
I want to hear the best and smartest people making their arguments for what role immigration is supposed to play in American life, and what does that mean for, in particular, how people immigrate. I mean, because for one thing, diplomats still come here, and they're not under the jurisdiction of the United States, but the laws have changed with regards to Indian tribes. So, like, we need to probably revisit this at some point. So,
okay, so Professor, since Ray, teacher, I think, or teacher or Professor Ray?
Oh, teacher. Yeah,
Teacher.
I don't have those three nasty little letters at the end of my name, PhD.
But this guy, I don't underestimate his ability to go through these documents.
I bet.
That we read is just unsurpassed. So
as far as citizen activism goes, we've got Teacher Tyler with a proposal, and you've seconded it, Professor Tootle. So
I'm open to it. I don't know.
Well, no, we talk about these as citizens, and
Right.
and so we should educate each other in debate. So we've got a proposal on the floor, a motion on the floor, and a second. I have a friendly amendment that we put as the preamble for our committee to study the reform of the Constitution. I think it's like 4 paragraphs up from Ronald Reagan's farewell address, as the preamble of immigration on what we should be thinking about as America. So that's your homework assignment. Go read or watch Reagan's farewell address and his thoughts on immigration, 4 paragraphs up from the bottom. I propose that's the preamble.
And by the way, the required reading is going to be Peter Schramm's essay on Born American, but in the wrong place.
I've got to read that. But
if you've never read, if you've never read that, then sometime if we can, I'll tell you another Peter Schramm story. That's
okay. I got to get that, but thank you both, Bart. Is Bill still with us? Tony, any of you have a question or a comment before we hang up for today? Sorry to interrupt.
I want to hear from Bill. If I get to pick on somebody, I want to hear from Bill today.
All right, Bill, you're picked up on.
So I really appreciate the focus on the executive orders today, and Stephen, you taking us back for perspective to Clinton, Biden, Obama. I mean, because I certainly admit that I paid way too little attention to what was going on in those administrations, and now the boomerang going back and forth is so evident. And so I'd like to tee up a thought maybe for a future session, and that's the impact of this dependency of presidents on EOs to satisfy their base on business. Because business, I mean, they're very positive about the deregulatory aspects promises of the Trump administration, based on the input that I'm getting. But I think they're underestimating the difficulty of running a business with the unpredictability of what's going to happen every 4 years. I mean, that's one thing that businesses abhor, is the ability is uncertainty and unpredictability, especially when it comes around long-term investments in the U.S. economy.
And we can absolutely do a whole episode on that, because I'm teed up to talk for 40 minutes on that.
Good, because I've been planning on writing a column on it as well. It distinguishes America from most countries around the world, that you don't just invest your property and buy a bunch of equipment and have your business, and all of a sudden you get taken over in a dictatorship and you lose it all. What? Yeah, America doesn't do that. The certainty is really essential for our society. Bill, thanks for raising that. Any other questions or follow-up?
How about from Tony?
Either one.
Let's go with Tony. I want to hear from him. He has
Hey,
some-
first thing, yeah, I got in a little late to make us go live on Facebook, so sorry about that. Apparently, once it started, I can't do that. But
Wait,
so-
oh, we're not on Facebook Live. So the
That's
curse
correct.
that Professor Tootle did is okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So the thing that I actually was talking about was the thing that has had an impact, at least in my neighborhood, and I'm really paying more attention to my neighborhood than anything right now, is that the order that was put out that ICE could go into schools and churches and things like that, which they previously were not able to do. That's actually, whether or not there's any action to it, it's created a lot of stir and concern. And so that's one. I think it was an executive order. It must have been that he shifted that. But that's something that I'm concerned about and I'm thinking about right now. Is just
Quick response, and I've got a follow up, Professor.
yeah, I would say you have no idea, right? I teach at a Hispanic serving institution where 95% of the students are Mexican American, and a healthy percentage of my students are illegal aliens or the children of illegal aliens, and there were some raids that actually predated the Trump administration. They actually happened a couple weeks ago, and people were freaked out. And and I have a friend who is an illegal alien who also has a felony drug conviction.
Nice.
He's now a productive member of society and has been for 15 or 20 years, but like he meets the qualification of, an illegal alien who has a felony, right? And he's in my book club. I mean,
Stop pinning him down. Or
I'm sorry. I mean, I don't want to. I don't think the federal government knows who's in my book club. But the hard thing is, I would say, listen to your my response to people locally is listen to your local officials, because even my sheriff, who's a big Trump supporter, is making a distinction and issuing a policy about exactly what he's going to do and also what's possible to do. And so, again, when they say they are prioritizing, mostly because they just don't have the resources, they don't have the manpower. I remember George Will once pointed this out at this is probably 30 years ago, and George Will pointed out that even if you commandeered every bus in America, you could not deport every illegal alien in America. So they have to prioritize, and even with a very strong Trump supporting sheriff, all of his messages go out of his way to say that the only people we're going to deport are cartel members and murderers and rapists, and even though there was a lot of fear about the raid that took place a couple weeks ago, all of them were cartel hitmen and rapists and sex traffickers. It turned out later. And the nice thing also was we got to hear from the nearby Congressman Valadeo. His office actually looked into the raids and then did his best to reassure his constituents.
So, Professor, thank you. I've got we're out of time, but I've got one add-in on empathy. So, thanks, Tony. I inadvertently am not being empathetic enough, and I'd like you to help a little bit. You wrote a speech to I think it was a Republican club or something, about the importance. It's not exactly pro-gay, but maybe, in summary, you're pro-gay or pro-freedom or something. Despite being a conservative, but because you're a conservative. It's one and the same. And you looked for common ground with them. Maybe it was to a gay and lesbian society or something that you spoke
it's the
to.
parents of gay and lesbian children.
Gotcha. And it was a very thoughtful, empathetic speech. I can assure you, because of people in my real life, there is some fear around the gay and lesbian and bisexual and transgender community. Can you give some salve, is that, or some empathy to them at least?
Well, I mean, I don't know if when you're talking about other people's feelings, one thing your therapist will tell you is that other people's feelings are a bottomless pit. And so you can't actually guarantee that what you say will be received by every human being in,
Sure.
in the way it's intended. But I would just reassure all of my gay and lesbian and trans friends that they have pretty, as far as I know, there might be things cooking, and again, follow rule 1 and 2, never underestimate the incompetence or capriciousness of the Trump administration or what could happen because of that incompetence and capriciousness. But I would say if you look at Trump's record, he is the one who really completed gay and lesbian equality. I mean, if we're going to give Lyndon Johnson credit for bringing the Democratic Party to support civil rights, President Trump deserves credit for completing gay and lesbian civil rights, because he's the one who made the other party accept full political and legal equality for gays and lesbians. And his first supporters were the log cabin clubs of California and other states, precisely because he was the one person out of that Republican field who was pro-gay. And the first song played at his inaugural was YMCA.
With the singers, you mean? It's not just the song, it's with the...
Yeah, they literally had the village people there, for those of you who don't subscribe, every Friday morning, Nellie Bowles has maybe my favorite thing to read of the week. Her TGIF is just incredible. Nellie Bowles from the Free Press just has the best Friday newsletter. And she described that in a humorous way that I will not repeat on this podcast. But she's very funny, and she has a wonderful voice. At any rate, yeah, I would say it's not something I'm worried about, and I say that as somebody who has been, I think, pretty upfront and on the front lines of gay rights issues for now going on almost 30 years. If I was worried, I would tell you.
That's helpful. It helps me a little bit. Tony, you good? All right, we've gone way over today, but as I told you, it was to be expected. Professor, thank you so very much for your time. Friends, thanks for signing in. We actually do kind of want to grow the group just a little bit now, so feel free to tell your friends.
Get Ray Tyler to keep coming back. I want to see his face in more of these. He's a great voice with a wonderful perspective, and
love that. So friends, tell your other friends. Bart, I'm sorry to skip you today.
Yeah, sorry, Bart. Your old hat.
We got to go. Have a good day, gentlemen.
See you all.
Sorry. Have a good one.
Yeah. Take care.